The big oil companies are money-making machines. Of the 30 most profitable companies in the world, 9 were in oil and gas. That is even more than the 8 companies in tech you hear and read so often about. The reason? The world is unbelievably hungry for oil. A recent report from the International Energy Agency states that global oil demand currently sits at 102 million barrels per day. 102 million barrels of oil every single day. Just to get this number into perspective, this is enough oil to fill the Empire State Building 16 times over. 16 times the Empire State Building filled entirely with oil. That is how much mankind needs every day. And it doesn't look like this will change anytime soon. Because that same report from the International Energy Agency also estimates global oil demand in 2030 to be at 106 million barrels per day. Accordingly, the big oil companies will mine even more oil and make even more money. But there's one group of people that do not like the oil industry at all. Investors. Chapter 2. Why investors hate big oil. First of all, institutional investors are often portrayed as cold-blooded moneymakers. Climate activists like to paint the picture that they would destroy the planet if it meant more dollars of profit for their funds. That is not the reality. Investors are also just human. They are influenced by the zeitgeist. And this puts emphasis on environmental concerns. Just think of the king of all institutional investors, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock. In his infamous letter to CEOs in 2020, he said that climate risk is investment risk. Now, you might say that this is just a fig leaf.
It's a trap!
Fink just wants to appear greener than he is. Well, for him personally, this may or may not be true. But on a systematic level, the investing community is absolutely focused on sustainability. There are hundreds of index funds that focus on sustainability. And they are even growing faster than conventional funds. And of course, companies whose business it is to mine for fossil fuels like oil and gas are not on top of the list for those sustainability funds. But investors also look at the states and governments around the world. Both the United States and the EU want to become carbon neutral by 2050. From this angle, it seems like the oil and gas industry is doomed. Or as The Economist has already put it in 1998, big oil is dead. But is it really? This brings us back to the present and the gigantic profits the oil corporations make. Chapter 3. Why we still rely on oil and gas for quite some time. To understand why oil and gas companies make so much profit, we must look at the importance oil and gas still hold for modern society. For all the talk about decarbonization, we still heavily rely on these fossil fuels. In 2023, the global consumption of oil was higher than ever. And while renewable sources of energy are picking up pace, still, 80% of our energy comes from fossil fuels. Yes, 80%. This is better than the almost 95% in the 1960s. But still a long way from a fossil-free humanity many people envision for our future. The dominance of fossil fuels is mainly due to their unparalleled energy density. Oil was formed by the work of millions of years of geology. Plants and microorganisms were compressed into condensed energy. If we burn them today, we can release millions of years of energy in a matter of seconds. For many of our modern devices, this fact is crucial. Take the vast amounts of energy a plane needs to fly. This is currently only viable with oil and not batteries. The batteries would be so heavy the plane couldn't fly anymore. With oil, just fill the tank with kerosene and you are good to cross the Atlantic. Plus, nature has already provided those fossil fuels with storage function. Try powering your refrigerator with renewables when the sun doesn't shine and there is no wind. Oil and gas, on the other hand, we can burn whenever we want to. But we do not just use oil to burn it. Plastics is everywhere. The device you are watching this video on, the clothes you're wearing. Unfortunately, there's even microplastics in your body because it was in the food you ate. And no matter how often you go shopping with a bag of cloth, the global use of plastics will rise astronomically in the future. So the demand for oil is here to stay for some time. And that's why the big oil companies invest so heavily into their businesses. Take the American giants Exxon and Chevron. Both of them have made blockbuster acquisitions. In October 2023, Chevron acquired the Hess Corporation for $53 billion. In May 2024, Exxon bought the petroleum company Pioneer Natural Resources for a record figure of almost $60 billion. They would not invest tens of billions of dollars into oil specialists if they did not believe into their commercial future. But there's also a shift in mentality. Just take Shell. Their former CEO, Ben Van Borden, liked to tell the story of his daughter confronting him at the dinner table about Shell's role in climate change. His message, "Dear critics, I hear you." Now Shell has a new CEO, Wael Sawan. He has scrapped the plans of his predecessor to cut oil output by 1 to 2% each year, and announced that oil production would instead remain stable. No more stories from the family dinner table. His first priority, reward our shareholders. Sawan is not alone. His colleagues at British Petroleum have cut back an emissions reduction plan. They now even want to increase production. Remember The Economist and how they said big oil is dead? Well, until now I only gave you the first part of the sentence. In total they wrote, big oil is dead, long live enormous oil. Chapter 4. What happened on the oil market in the last years? First, look at where we're coming from. The corona pandemic severely hit the oil industry. Travel was restricted, supply chains were broken, and factories could not work. There was simply no demand for oil. And even worse, there was a lot of uncertainty in the market. Nobody knew what would happen in the next days, weeks, let alone months. This sent down prices to a historic monthly average of $18 per barrel in April 2020. On the 20th of April 2020, prices for crude oil even went into the negative for the first time in history, going down to about minus $40 per barrel. That's because there was still a supply of oil, but simply no place to store. And if you have oil and nowhere to put it, it can have a negative value. Now with the end of the pandemic, demand for oil is soaring again, sending prices to over $100 in May 2022, a 10-year high. Those high prices are not, however, only influenced by a rise in demand, but also lowered supply. Since 2022, OPEC has taken cuts in oil production. But probably even more important is the war in Ukraine. EU sanctions against oil exports from Russia, the second largest producer of oil and natural gas, have made oil and gas more expensive, at least for Western countries. The Guardian goes on to quote one expert saying, "Regardless of what happens on the front lines, the fossil fuel majors are the main winners of the war in Ukraine." And this leads us to our final chapter. While oil and gas stocks are not for everyone. The profits of oil companies are entirely linked to one variable the companies themselves can't control, the oil price. And this price fluctuates a lot. Remember 2020 with the historically low prices? Well, this also led to colossal losses for the big oil companies. $22 billion for Exxon, $21.7 billion for Shell, $20.3 billion for BP, $7.2 billion for Total, and $5.5 billion for Chevron. And this is what also makes them unattractive for many investors, the extreme volatility. Investing into oil companies is like riding an unstoppable roller coaster. You cannot control where it goes. If sales at McDonald's, Apple, or Mercedes go down, the board can fire the CEO and hire one who has to come up with a new strategy. If the price of oil goes down, no CEO in the world can change that. And nobody knows what the long-term future might bring. Whether oil demand will truly go down significantly in the future because of decarbonization. The cheap valuation on big oil stocks might just be a risk premium afforded to those willing to bet that we will rely more on fossil fuels than we currently hope.